Hi, my name is Sarah Goodwin-Thiel, and I am the Community Engagement Librarian for KU Libraries, as well as the coordinator of the Harricombe Gallery Exhibition Program. I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight and welcome you to the Harricombe Gallery. Thank you for being with us this evening. I know more than a few of you have come quite a distance to be here, and I just want to thank all of you for your interest and willingness to be here to spend this evening with us. The Resist and Respect, Kansans Respond to the Vietnam War exhibition represents a chorus of voices, a phrase given to me by my friend. I think that aptly puts it. In this case, the chorus is made up of voices of students, of faculty, of community members, from cities and campuses across the state of Kansas. And so many more out there. I kept finding things. As we kept looking, we found more and more things. So this is a very abbreviated version, but Kansas was responding in many ways to the Vietnam War before and after. The materials featured in the exhibition come from the libraries of the University of Kansas, from K-State University, from Bethel College, and from the Kansas State Historical Society. The archivists from K-State and Bethel are both here. They made the trip and also did a lot of work for this exhibition, so I thank them. I'd like to thank our KDHK DJ, Kyle, who provided some era background music for us. It was a lot of fun. Thank you, Kyle. And we have a great program ahead of us. And to talk further about the program itself and to introduce our speaker, our wonderful speaker, is our Dean of Libraries, Kevin Smith.
Thank you, Sarah, for that introduction, and especially thank you, Sarah, for all of your hard work on bringing this exhibit to fruition. We appreciate it. You do great work for us, and this looks to be another triumph.
We're a great team.
We are so pleased to have each of you here tonight for Resist and Respect, Kansans Respond to the Vietnam War. I also want to start the evening by acknowledging our major partners in this exhibit from K-State and from Bethel. We're so glad to have their archivists here. It's a privilege to work with our colleagues throughout the state. We're also grateful to the Kansas State Historical Society, which provided some of the images that are included in the exhibit. And I want to give one more thank you. I do this a lot. I want to give one more thank you to the KU Libraries faculty and staff who have done many people have done so many different things to support this exhibit and to support the work of the libraries in general. It is an honor to work with this group. I'm really especially drawn to the title of tonight's exhibit, Resist and Respect, because to me it truly highlights the ambiguity that many people, and especially my generation, have felt about the Vietnam War for many years. The Vietnam War was a turning point in our political life as a nation. And for many of us, it was a turning point in our personal lives as well. I know that we have quite a few veterans from the Vietnam War, as well as veterans from other parts of the service in both peacetime and wartime. And I would very much like to take a moment to thank you all for your service and to say how glad we are that you're here. I'm especially honored tonight that we have two gentlemen that we have with us, Tom Berger and John Musgrave, who Tom and John were co-chairs, am I correct, of the committee that brought the KU Vietnam Veterans Memorial to campus. And Tom is the executive director of the Veterans Health Council at the Vietnam Veterans of America. We're honored to have you both with us today. I also want to take a moment to thank all of those people who conscientiously exercised their right of free speech and protest and asked America to think about whether or not the war in Vietnam was the right path for our nation. I think we still have a lot of ambiguity, a lot of conflict around the war. But I think perhaps the most important learning is that there was true patriotism on both sides of that debate. So our speaker this evening is Dr. David Ambler, the KU's Vice Chancellor Emeritus of Student Affairs. I asked Dr. Ambler how I should introduce him, and he told me 3 things I should say about him. He's a Hoosier by birth, has 3 degrees from Indiana, and has worked at Indiana, Kent State, and KU. That hardly does justice to his distinguished career. And he's telling me to stop. Dr. Ambler was KU's Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs for 25 years, and before that, in perhaps what may have been the single most difficult job at the time, was the Dean of Students, is that right, at Kent State in 1970 when the shootings happened there. So there is nobody, perhaps, in a better position to talk to us about that ambiguity that I was referring to than Dr. David Ambler. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. I've told some of you a story I've told several times. I would rather go to a professional meeting and talk for 10,000 of my colleagues than talk in front of 100 people from my own university. Tonight, this is an explanation point on that concern. I'm seeing people I haven't seen for a long time. I said the Vietnam War always will bring people out of the woodwork. But before I get started, I did want to call out a person that Kevin just introduced. Tom Berger. Tom, please stand. Tom. Those of us who worked in the university administration, worked in student affairs, particularly know Tom from a long period of time. Tom was here for more than half of my tenure at KU. He really was a conscience for this university about our treatment of Vietnam veterans. He worked to make KU accessible and caring about those people. And his work with helping to build the Vietnam War Memorial was just stunning. And its location and its design, a lot belongs to Tom. We had lunch today, and he told me this is the first time he's been back since he left in 1993. But I just want to say a big welcome back to one of our great alums. Sarah wanted me to tell a story that goes with the whole era of Vietnam War here at KU. It's a story about the memorial, which I think is just an incredibly interesting story that Dale Seiferling really initiated or told me about it first. In 1982, Jim Lair and Bob McNeil from the Jim Lair, Bob McNeil NewsHour on PBS were here at KU to get the William Allen White Award from the School of Journalism. While they were here, they learned that the KU Student Senate, led by Lisa Eichner, then the student body president, to build the first freestanding Vietnam memorial on any university campus. Jim Lair commented, "This is bananas. It wasn't too many years ago these students were burning down a university. Now they're building a memorial for that war." So he and Bob went back and several days later did a clip on the NewsHour about what the KU students were doing to build the Vietnam Memorial. Sitting down in San Antonio, Texas, was a man by the name of K.K. Amini. You may recognize that name. K.K. saw that NewsHour. He puffed up with great pride, called the KU Endowment Association. Actually, he was a 1946 engineering school graduate. He had not maintained a contact with the university or with the school even. But anyway, when he saw this clip, he took great pride because he had become a big American patriot. His family left the Middle East during World War II, escaped before the Nazi takeover there. He's from Persia, as he refers to Iran, and got to the United States with no money, but he had a sponsor in New York City who decided to send him out to Caltech to take a look at Caltech for engineering school. But his sponsor said, on your way out, I want you to stop in Lawrence, Kansas, and visit KU and its School of Engineering. It has a great School of Engineering. It's a very low-cost school. It's very friendly to international students. You may like it. When KK came here, fell in love with the place, was admitted to the scholarship halls. He was one of the first students to live in the, international students to live in the scholarship halls. During his time there, a woman by the name of Margaret Winsky from Kansas City, a daughter of some Polish immigrants to the United States, went down to interview him for the Kansan. He got smitten with her, fell in love with her. They got married, and they moved to San Antonio, and he made zillions on oil and gas. Okay, that was back in 1946. Anyway, he sees this story about KU, and he calls. In fact, the only thing he could remember about Lawrence was there was a Rainey's drugstore. So he had the operator get a hold of Dick Rainey, who happened to know, was a good friend of Todd Seymour's, and so they got connected to the endowment. And he told the Endowment Association, Todd, at the time, he said, I just saw this clip. I want you to tell the students whatever amount of money they need to complete that project, I will provide. Now, he didn't know whether we needed $1,000 or $1 million for that. This got the Endowment Association excited. They had never heard of KK Amini, and voila. It ended up he gave $11,000 to complete the fund drive to build the Vietnam Memorial. We then found out about his connection to the Scholarship Hall, and we now have KK Amini Scholarship Hall and Margaret Amini Scholarship Hall. KK died in the late 90s. His wife Margaret just died this spring. Three paintings that Ken Stoner, Director of Housing, had made for the Amini family. One, they were all done on slates of Battenfeld Hall roof. That was where KK lived. A painting of first of Battenfeld Hall, and then one of KK Amini Hall, and then one of Margaret Amini Hall. They were framed and given to the Amini family. When Margaret died, their daughter called Dale Seiferling, said, we want to ship these paintings back to KU. They have arrived here, and they will be hung in those three residence halls. So completing the circle of veterans. A wonderful, wonderful story about how our alums feel about this university and about a connection to the Vietnam War and scholarship halls. Just a great story. I just wanted to tell you about that. Long-awaited Ken Burns PBS series on the Vietnam War begins this weekend, this next week. In the meanwhile, it has sparked a renewed interest in what arguably was the most controversial military engagement in our history. Such exhibits like the one the KU Library is doing, as well as a variety of civic forums regarding the Vietnam War, are very appropriate and long overdue. It is healthy and helpful for us to revisit such periods of social upheaval and see if we have learned from them in ways that will strengthen our fragile democracy. This tragic war tore at the moral fabric of this country, pitted one generation against another, separated parent and child, conflicted the movement for racial equity, and stymied the global efforts for worldwide peace and reconciliation. Ironically, at the beginning of this war, most Americans could not locate Vietnam on a world map. They knew little of its long colonization by the French or the reasoning for its partitioning. Americans did not understand or accept why our government felt that without our intervention, Vietnam would be a major domino in the communist worldwide acquisition and expansion. Everything about the war was unpopular, yet it persisted for over a decade. And when it finally concluded in the mid-1970s, two aspects of the war haunted our national psyche and continue to do so today. One is the inexcusable, ugly treatment of Vietnam vets, and paradoxically, the second one, the illegal abuse of the constitutional and civil rights of the young people, mostly college students, who opposed this war from the very beginning. My task today is to examine this latter issue, the abuse of the civil rights of college students. The issue did not begin with the civil rights movement or the Vietnam War protests, but it did become intense and highly visible during that time because of the national preoccupation with the social upheaval caused by both movements. It manifests itself in what I would describe as the deliberate and illegal efforts of state and federal governments to squash such dissent, and the duplicity of many of our universities in their attempt, on the one hand, to maintain their commitment to free speech, and on the other hand, their need to maintain law and order, lest they be punished, as they were, by their government sponsors, their alumni, and their parents. For sure, some of the student protesters were guilty of violating criminal law and university regulations, but the lion's share of the responsibility for the many tragic events in denying student citizens their rights rests with our government. To repeat, the issue pertaining to student civil rights, though, did not begin with the Vietnam War protests. Indeed, the issue goes back to the founding of Harvard, when students protested the heavy hand of the administration and faculty in the private lives of students. The stated mission of Harvard, to educate the clergy and the gentlemen, allowed the university to dictate students' social behavior, dress, language, religious practice, and most assuredly, their sexual behavior. Rooted in both British and American common law, the legal concept of in loco parentis, Latin for in place of the parent, has been used by American courts from the mid-1800s to the late 1950s to give universities control over virtually all aspects of the academic and, even more important, the non-academic lives of their students. These court decisions were based primarily on the state laws defining the age of majority at 21. If you are old enough, I'm sure you recall the universal student fear of the authoritarian, deans of men and deans of women, who could summarily disrupt your life as a college student. When I first entered the student affairs profession in the early 1960s, it was still possible for people in my profession to expel students without a hearing or an appeal for violation of all our rules, written or unwritten, on or off campus, regarding dress, curfew hours, social behavior, parental housing regulations, use of alcoholic beverages, political behavior, and our all-inclusive rule of conduct unbecoming a college student. To top it all off, we routinely notified student parents of such behavior and noted it in a student's permanent record and official transcript. And we routinely shared that information with anybody who inquired. Early in my career, I found myself at odds with my profession and my universities and how we treated students with respect to their protected rights. I found it curious that an 18-year-old who elected not to go to college was treated more as an adult than one who became a student. Any violation of societal rules by the non-college student are adjudicated by our courts with the same guarantees of due process and equal protection as provided for all citizens. Not so for the college student. Failure to mind your manners could earn you a permanent trip home without any opportunity to defend yourself from false accusations. With a large increase in the number of first-generation college students following World War II, universities found themselves adjudicating regulations that in fact were the same as misdemeanors and felony law violations while ignoring any need for due process. As my own philosophy developed over time, I came to believe that our society and our universities would be much better off if the age of majority was 18. The completion of a secondary education, it seemed to me, should find all students ready to assume the role of an adult. And we need to design our educational system to achieve that end, so that they could be free from parental control and ready to govern his or her own life. An 18-year-old who elects to pursue higher education should not forfeit his or her civil rights at the gates of the campus. Additionally, universities should not attempt to handle violations of law as university discipline. Stealing a book from the university bookstore should be treated the same as stealing one from Barnes & Noble. The status as a student should have no impact one way or the other on the handling of criminal behavior in our society. The allegations of a crime, particularly if it is a violent crime, may require the university to temporarily suspend a student until the matter is resolved in court. Once a student has been judged in a violation of a civil or criminal offense, the university may have educational or safety reasons to impose additional sanctions. However, satisfaction of one's debt to society should, in most cases, allow a student to resume collegiate studies. The elements of this philosophy I've just outlined became much more feasible in the early 1960s when the courts began to recognize the civil rights of students, spelling the eventual demise of the use of in-local prints by public universities. A 1961 landmark case, Dickson versus Alabama, was the first of a number of cases declaring that the basic elements of due process as outlined in the 14th Amendment needed to be evident in public university disciplinary procedures before the student could be dismissed. Those elements included: 1, student behavior regulations needed to be printed and distributed. 2, notice must be given to the student of the charges against them. 3, the student should be given the names of witnesses against them and a written report of the facts to which the witnesses will testify. 4, the student must be given an opportunity to present their own defense. The findings of the hearing must be presented to the student. 6, the sanctions must be reasonable to the severity of the offense. Other cases following the Dickson versus Alabama elaborated on these requirements, including the right to appeal. 2 government actions during this time period hastened a major change in the relationship of students to their universities. In March 1971, the 26th Amendment of the Constitution passed in Congress, and 4 months later was ratified by the states. It simply lowered the voting age to 18 for both federal and state elections. However, the pressures and reasoning that led to the passage of this amendment also initiated the almost immediate adoption in 44 states of 18 as the year of majority. 3 other states had earlier adopted 19 as the age of majority. Today, all the states except Mississippi have set the majority age of majority at 18 or 19. Mississippi remains at 21. These landmark cases and governmental actions forced every public university to codify its non-academic regulations in a manner that satisfied the court's definition of due process in the university environment. Disciplinary boards had to be trained in the basic elements of due process. Speech codes were modified. So long as the purpose of student organizations were legal, they had to be recognized and allowed to operate on the campus. The student press was freed from university censorship. Student groups could invite speakers of their own choice to campus, subject only to regulations of time, place, and manner. Dress codes, curfews, and other such frivolous rules quickly fell by the wayside. All of this was the social and legal background and backdrop for the campus protests of the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War during the 60s and the first half of the 70s. In spite of these legal changes, universities were under extreme pressure to summarily silence political dissent. University presidents and their chief student affairs officers found themselves in many a conflicting situation. They were caught between the need to respond to these legal changes, satisfy student demands for more freedom, maintain order, protect lives, and deal with the extraordinary pressure from alumni, parents, governing boards, and state political and government leaders. It was truly a no-win situation. Most of them were not prepared for the kind of emotional, professional, and physical threats that the times produced. Many were fired, resigned, or retired. The higher education profession lost many a good leader during these years. In my view, however, it was the conflicting attitudes among these different leadership groups that resulted in some of the most egregious violations of the constitutional rights of students on many a campus during the intense and dangerous years of the Vietnam War. I was not here at KU during the period of time, so it's best that I not comment on what happened here during the Vietnam War. As Kevin told you, I was at Kent State University in Ohio and was a member of the student affairs staff there. However, what happened here at KU, at Kent State, or at many other universities across the country was not very different. The tragic killing of 4 students and wounding of 9 others on the Kent campus could have easily happened here or elsewhere. I strongly believe that had the rule of law been observed and the protection of constitutional rights been given priority, we could have avoided many of the conflicts and tragedies that occurred on many of our campuses. Yet Kent State became the icon of the Vietnam protests, and criminal and civil litigations that followed set standards for the future definition of student rights and university management of civil dissent and protest. Witnessing the killing of students on a campus secured my conviction that there can be no sanctuary on campus or anywhere in our society from the rule of law and individual liberties. Let me briefly describe what happened at Kent and the major violation of civil rights that occurred. In May 1970, following the expansion of the war into Cambodia, Kent State students rallied in protest for 2 days, trashed the city of Kent, and set fire to the ROTC building on campus. The Kent mayor ordered a curfew, and the governor of Ohio sent the National Guard to campus, claiming that he had proclaimed martial law and given the Guard control over the campus. On Monday, May 4th, the students stated that they would go on with a planned protest rally at noon, and the Guard said it would not allow the rally to take place. Shortly after the rally began, Guard moved in and dispersed the student crowd of several thousand people into smaller groups. Suddenly, and without warning, one rifle squad began firing, killing 4 and wounding 9 others. The president immediately announced the closing of the university, and the local county prosecutor obtained a court order closing the university indefinitely. By 6 p.m. that day, the campus was totally vacated. It remained closed until under the court order, and essentially did not resume operations until the fall quarter. Litigation by the parents of the students killed and wounded and other student leaders began the next year and lasted until early 1977, when the last civil trial was concluded. The primary outcome of the several trials in the state of Ohio found the government of the state of Ohio responsible for numerous violations of constitutionally protected rights. What were those violations? Number 1, the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances, our First Amendment. The federal courts held that an order limiting students to gathering in groups no larger than 3 and the dispersing of the rally on Monday were a constitutional violation in that the governor had not ever issued the martial law proclamation that he claimed. I might take a sidetrack here and tell you, Jim Rhodes was the governor, very popular man. He was running for the U.S. Senate against another very popular family, Robert Taft Jr. He was behind in the polls, and it's believed by many of us that his behavior was dictated by his effort to get elected more than trying to restore peace on campus. He lost the election. He couldn't be elected to the governor again. Our new governor was John Gilligan. You probably recognize that name. He's the father of Catholic Sebelius. Number 2, the right of the people to be secure against unreasonable search and seizure. Our 4th Amendment. The day after the university was closed, the local county prosecutor used the campus and city police to search without warrant the rooms of all 8,000 students living in the university residence halls. The students left most of their belongings in their rooms when the campus was evacuated. The prosecutor compounded his error by displaying for the media the entire stash of items confiscated from the student rooms. A suit filed by several students the next fall in federal district court found for the students and got the prosecutor a scolding of his lifetime. Number 3, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. The 5th Amendment. The special grand jury investigating the Kent State incident indicted 25 students and faculty members for inciting the riot and rioting. No one was indicted for the killing and wounding of the 13 students. In an unusual section included in its report, the state grand jury blamed the university administration for the tragedy. It declared the university student conduct code as a failure, since only 5 students had been dismissed that previous year for social conduct violations. It faulted the university for, quote, overemphasizing the right to dissent, for allowing controversial groups to operate on the campus, for permitting foreign films to be shown, for allowing students to invite speakers of their choice to come to campus, and it faulted faculty members for criticizing units of the federal government in their classroom. This section of the report, obviously, was challenged in the federal district court, which found it to be highly prejudicial to those indicted and ordered it removed and destroyed. After the trial of the first 3 indicted students were found not guilty or the charges dismissed, the state dropped the remaining 25 indictments. 4th, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The 5th Amendment. It remains a mystery to this day as to why the National Guard fired upon the students. In a 1975 civil rights suit, the parents of the students killed and wounded were asking the court simply to hold someone responsible for what happened to their children. The district court exonerated all the defendants, including the governor, the National Guard leadership, the rifle squad, and the president of the university. However, on appeal, the Federal Court of Appeals in Cincinnati negated that decision, removed the president of the university as a defendant, and ruled that the governor and the state of Ohio were in charge of Kent State University on May 4th and were potentially liable for 5th Amendment violations. After a 2-year trial, the state of Ohio then quickly moved for an out-of-court settlement. Less than $1 million total was awarded to the 13 families. With the conclusion of this case in 1977, the Kent State tragedy finally achieved closure. Kent State was the watershed event in the protest of the Vietnam War. But was it a turning point in the recognition of university students as adult citizens who do not surrender their constitutional protected rights when they enter our colleges or universities? I don't know. I'm not sure. One would hope we have learned to see students not only as adults, but as citizens as well. In so many ways today, we're still trying to incorporate into all facets of our society the values embedded in our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. As Ferguson, Missouri reminds us of the need for continual conversation about race relations, perhaps Ken Burns' PBS series on the Vietnam War will provoke additional conversations about the rule of law and its equal protection in our society and hopefully on our campuses as well. I live and I survive on the belief that we continue to make progress in securing justice for all people. However, it is imperative that we all continue to participate in the quest to form a more perfect union. Thank you very much. Sarah says we're going to take some questions and
We are
comments.
going to take questions. Does anyone have some?
Where's Tom? I can't imagine. Yes.
Dr. Ambler, that was one of the finest talks that I've heard here at this library. And I think some have been very, very good.
Thank you.
And I appreciate very much all the work that you did to put that together. That was very, very well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Nails time. Hamburger.
As you know, many of the efforts to get the wall put up here mirrored those which accompanied that at the national level for the national wall, everything. There are other people in this room that did be thanked. Steve Grabo is here from the Art and Public Spaces. He was sort of the go-between, and there's a number of other people, but Dr. Ambler here was right in the middle of things. And so I really he deserves a round of applause for
I should also give a shout out to the man who made it all possible for me, who hired me, Gail Shank. He's celebrating his 90th birthday. Thank you very much. Oh, whoops.
Hey, I've heard you describe what went on in your life at the time of Kent State. Do you feel comfortable in sharing any of that with the audience tonight?
Yeah, if you don't mind seeing an old man cry. I was really enjoying a great start of my career after having left Indiana. In fact, I was telling somebody, I remember sitting in my office at Indiana University and looking out down towards the administration building, seeing a bunch of protesters on the beginning of the Vietnam War. And I said, I don't know anything to do with that. I'm going to get out of here, so I went to Kent State. But it was a great university, and my 11 years there was absolutely a great experience. As all of you know, our engagement with students during that time hasn't been seen much since. Students knew what was going on in their world and our world, and they were ready to engage you in that kind of conversation. And you know, I always said, in addition to the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, we also had a student rights movement that was active, started by Mario Savio at Berkeley. We had the counterculture movement, hippie movement still going. We had the women's movement, and we had the environment movement. And all these were working on the campuses at the same time. I don't know how Kent, this quiet little university that nobody had heard about before 1970, attracted all these people there, but we had a lively campus. I think the man I worked for, I was assistant vice president at the time of the incident. The man I worked for was a hero in trying to prevent what happened from happening. Had we been able to bring in the Ohio Highway Patrol rather than have the National Guard there, we might have had a different outcome because we had had good experience with them of handling riotous situations where nobody got hurt, nobody had to get arrested. But the National Guard was totally unprepared. There were people in the National Guard who had not had any weapons training. They had joined the National Guard, and you participate in a National Guard unit, and sometime they send you for 6 months active duty for your training. They were there on that campus with loaded weapons and had never had any weapon training. So, we had a situation that was taken out of our hands very quickly when the governor came in. I don't mean to be so critical of Governor Rhodes, but I am. He came in on Sunday after the ROTC building was burned on Saturday night, and he met with us, and he told us to stay out of it, that he was in charge, and he had put the guard in charge, and he was going to take care of this, because these students were worse than the brown shirts of Nazi Germany. He went out to a press conference and repeated that charge, and that just inflamed our situation. So everything kept getting out of control. On the day of the shooting, I had been out on the campus, out in the commons where the rally was going to take place, and you could see the confrontation coming with the guard and the students. I had no sooner got back to the administration meeting to report to the president and the vice presidents, and we got word that the guard had started and the shooting took place within 5 or 10 minutes. I think the aftermath was so much worse than the event itself for me. We had to evacuate 21,000 students in less than 6 hours.
Wow.
We put them on buses, we took them to airports in Cleveland, we drove them up into Michigan, we went down to Cincinnati and Columbus. We went to Pittsburgh, we went all over to get our students home. And it was an amazing feat that we were all able to do that with people having just been killed and shot. After the university was closed, we did have a short summer session, but we really didn't open till fall. Mary Kate and I had gone home to my parents in the Chicago area in August after all the investigations were concluding at the end of the summer. My parents, who didn't know for a long time whether I was dead or alive because the phone lines were all shut down to Kent. So we took our 2 young daughters and went home for a couple of days just to get away. While I was there, I got a call from the assistant to the president who said, Bob Matson, vice president, has resigned. The Board of Trustees is meeting next week. The president intends to take your name to the board as assistant, to be the interim vice president. If you're opposed to that, you better get your butt back here pretty fast. And I raced back, and 2 days later I was the interim vice president and had to get ready to open the campus when many of our students would be coming back for the first time. And this grand jury report came out right as we were opening the campus, so everything was tense. That whole first year was a series of real tense period of time. At one point when we were closed down, we got a call from the state patrol saying that they had good information that some people were coming into camp with the intent of wiping out some of the university administration, and we best take our families and get out of town. I tried to find Mary Kate, and get her kids out of daycare or wherever they were, and we left town for 2 days. And one of our staff members had a country home, and we all gathered out there. And after 2 days, I said, Mary Kate, let's go back home. I'd rather face a rifle than live in a communal living. But then the worst part, going on too long, Carl, because I heard the governor tell us to stay out of it, I became the university's chief witness as to the primary legal issue facing those trials. Who was in charge of Kent State University on May 4th, 1970? We said, the guard came in, the governor told us to stay out. The guard took over, and they were the ones who told us that students could gather in groups, only in groups of 3, and they were running this place. So I had to go to all these trials and testify before the court. But in the trials, you essentially had the university versus the state versus the parents. So it's kind of a triangle. We had 3 parties to those suits. And I got confronted by some of the parents at those trials because I was the first university administrator that had been able to see since their son or daughter had been wounded or killed. That was pretty tough. I came here in summer of 1977 and had barely moved into my office when I got a call from our attorney back at Kent saying the decision exonerating the guard and everybody had been reversed by the Court of Appeals on a technicality, really. And they were remanding the case, the case back to the district court, but they had removed the president as a defendant and made the statement, the evidence is clear that the state of Ohio and Governor Rhodes is in charge of Kent State University, not the university president. And that was a tipping scale because the governor had been claiming that they were only carrying out the orders of the university when they did what they did. So once that declaration was made, they settled out of court. But when the lawyer called me, he said, "Don't unpack your bags, you're going to have to be back to testify again." And then the Court of Appeals quickly made this ruling. A very, very difficult time, but in the end, I have to say I'm very thankful for that experience, tragic as it was, because it taught me so much about those of us in administrative positions and that what we do makes a difference in people's lives. That was worth it. Thank you again.